Welcome back. Welcome in. This is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com. This is a Paramount podcast. I am Mike Casaza, here to dip into the West Virginia University sports mailbag. Again, that means questions and answers, questions from you, answers from me. The other side of the screen, Chris Anderson. Chris, used to be a joke. Now it's more of an observation. Never really like an off season or an off time. Um, Transfer portal closes. West Virginia has players coming out of it for football with no way to get in. Baseball season overlaps, obviously. Basketball at the same time has the coach roaming around the ballpark, lining up recruits to fill out a roster of 13. This goes around and around and around. And before you know it, it'll be camp season here soon, too, in the football team. Pretty robust time.
No rest. I was gonna say, I think we've discussed it before about May used to be like one of the deadest months, and now here we are talking about another transfer edition for basketball, more transfer editions for football. Camps are starting earlier and earlier. For the second year in a row, it's a May football camp that'll kick things off this summer. So, yeah, busy times.
Because of that, lots of questions. We have a lot of questions like, what's going on? How is this going to work? Did I miss a rule change? Things like that. Turns out the answer is yes to some of those. Like, for example, did you know that the whole grad transfer thing changed where the players can't graduate and go in the portal like they could last year? Like last year, when West Virginia had that coaching change, um, all of a sudden players went in the portal because they were allowed to as grad transfers. That rule no longer exists. So if you're looking at the math for West Virginia's football team, thinking, okay, they'll have X number of players who graduate this past weekend, they'll just go in the portal. Can't do that now. I was not aware of that until I kind of did some research and found it. Actually, it was written by our 24/7 site, so probably should have known that one, but that's how I found out. But I guess my point being that sometimes the questions and answers are necessary. So without further ado, let's let me, the person who said I don't have all the answers, attempt to actually provide some answers here with you, Chris.
That's right. Today, let's start out with basketball and other sports. We're going to save some of the football discussion until later in the week because, yeah, two podcasts this week. Some good questions in there from everybody over at the Ear Sports VIP board. So let's talk basketball, Mike. Let's talk scholarships. We talked about how football might be in a funny spot as far as numbers go. Basketball has three open spots. A couple of these questions. Um, One of them from Wolfie 4250. He mentions, what do you do with the last four spots? Of course, since then, picked up a commitment from Joseph Yusufu, probably a backup point guard type, or maybe a low guard, however you want to look at it. But how would you fill out the remainder of the roster given what West Virginia has and what they need with these final three spots?
Yeah, had no inclination Yusufu was going to happen. Like I saw him go in the portal, and two things happened to me. I was like, wow, he still has eligibility. I didn't know he was hurt all last year. And two, I was thinking, interesting, because he was at Drake with DeVries. And again, didn't see this one coming, but it kind of satisfies how it would have answered for scholarships. And it could have been Connor Enright, it could have been Aiton Wright, but someone who knows a little bit about DeVries, Drake, the offense they run, the defense they run, also how the coaching works. So you can go to a player and say, hey, the coach is like this sometimes. Don't worry about it. Just typical transition stuff. So he kind of works for that. Also, I'd really like a heat check guy and or a shooter or someone like that. And he can do that. Like if you look at some of his numbers in the past, whether it was at Kansas, not a whole lot of run at Washington State last year, and then certainly at Drake, he could get it going and it was a really good reserve too. I don't know if he'll start probably going off the bench here, but that's a guy who can get you buckets off the bench. How do I fill the last three? With one exception here, I'm not looking for positions as much as skill right now, or an ability or an attribute. The exception is I want someone big, maybe like a starting big or someone who can actually push um, Eduardo Andre for that starting five spot. And that's even if Andre is a starter or the five in this situation. But I want someone big, someone who can play that spot. And then from there, I got two spots. I really want shooting. Just want shooting because you got all these big guys, like long guys. You're going to be able to spread the floor if you get a shooter, and you can let that length do its work on offense or on the boards. Just want shooting. And I'm not sure that you're going to get it from a true freshman, even though Powell does profile as a good shooter. Yusufu helps. Tucker DeVries, there's some shooters there, but I just can't get enough of that. And then the last one is I just want a ball handler. And again, it doesn't have to be a point guard. Like the shooter doesn't have to be a two. He could be a three. He could be a one. And then just someone who can handle the ball and could, take it out of Javon Small's hands, or if Small was just having a tough day and you need someone to run the offense, just somebody who can give you a way to get into the offense, a way to get out of pressure, a way to hold on to the ball late in the game, or when you're kind of like getting trapped and you got to make free throws, something like that. Just a cool ball handler kind of guy, run the show. I'm not sure what you call it. Is it a point guard? Is it a combo? Is it a two? Don't know, but I'm not so obsessed right now about the positions as much as I would be what attribute do they add to this mix they have.
I like everything you said there because yeah, the big thing for me with the last three, just like you, I need big, I need some shooting, and then I wouldn't mind another freshman, if you could find that. You don't want to stretch yourself and just take some random high school kid just to be taking him, but if you could do that, that'd be great. Because even right now, still, there's what only two freshmen and a sophomore, two freshmen, two sophomores, something like that with the current setup of the roster. So yes, there's always turnover. No, it's not the same as it always used to be where, hey, you got to even out the classes. It'd be great to have three freshmen, three sophomores. Those days are gone. But still, you don't want to end up having to find 10 guys every time. Yasufu, good ad, solid ad. This is a joke that had been going on the message board of, hey, you can't get 13 transfers and 13 starters. 13 guys aren't going to start in a basketball game. You have to find somebody else. And hey, look at this. Yasufu, 119 games played, 16 starts. The last time he played for Drake back in 2020, 21, 31 games played, 7 starts. He is a reserve guy. He is a guy that could come off the bench. He knows how to do it. He's comfortable with DeVries. DeVries is comfortable with him. So I like that ad. But yeah, I'm with you with what final 3 spots. Give me a big man, give me a shooter. I'd love it if there was another freshman in there to just kind of throw in on the bench, maybe red shirt, whatever to develop for the future of this program. Let's see here, Michael. Next question. It related. WVU Browns asks, with the open spots for basketball, is there a chance any of the offers for 25 reclassified to 24? I'll answer that real quick with probably not. I mean, I never rule anything out with this. There's always guys that can reclassify, especially with all of these prep schools and everything that guys go through. 5th year self red shirts, if you will. I've heard of homeschool red shirts. All sorts of funny stuff happens with high school athletes. So it's possible, but I think at this point of the game, unlikely because usually you have already set those wheels in motion with your previous classes from previous years.
It's definitely part of their homework right now, though. Like, could this guy reclassify? Could we sneak him in
Yeah.
here? Just happened in Arizona too with really good player Josan Sanan. We've heard that name a couple times, Chris. But it happens, and sometimes when that player reclassifies, it doesn't work, and then he's out there in effect a second time because again, look at the guy at Arizona. He came in, and all of a sudden they added portal players that may have one of their better players come back to and not go to the draft. Here's a guy that got encouraged to reclassify. And now the situation doesn't look as good. Does he want to? I don't even know if you can declassify, but now someone like that in that situation may have a spot to look at. So I think who knows if they do that. It is hard, like you said, but I would be very confident saying that that's part of their homework right now is under what rock can you find players? And that's certainly one you turn over.
Next question from WVUG13 asks, outside of center, is the finishing five and or starting five already on the roster?
It's a good question because I think when they had some run before and they had a couple players, I was like, I'm not sure if the 5 starters or 5 finishers are on the roster. So this might be a bit of continuity in that question. The answer now would be more definitive, yeah, than before, where I wasn't sure. I was pretty sure that wasn't the case. Got to add Small to the mix. You'd feel a lot better when you see his signature come across the fax machine. Get that news release because he's actually not yet on the roster, but he would be one of those 5 for sure. You'd feel better about that. I could see a situation now where they have their 5 for sure. And here's the good part, Chris. If I'm wrong, that means they've actually made some quality additions late in the game too.
Which leads me to, from Flyfish One, what is going on with Javon Smalls? Mike, do we need a panic meter update right now?
Got a lot of mileage out of that panic meter question, didn't they?
Great. Hey, I appreciate the content.
You would just feel better if you did because that was a popular player in the portal. He was not just West Virginia looking at him as a guy who was good at ECU, was good at Oklahoma State, and with the coaching change, he's going to be a top of the chart for a lot of schools. Like when coaching changes happens, what happens? You look at their roster and say, who do we like from that team? Because they're probably going to be in the portal. So Oklahoma State changed pretty early in the process, and you look at that team and you say, you know what? I remember him from last year. and he had a good year. He was in the portal last year from ECU. He went to Oklahoma State. Wow, he had a good year at Oklahoma State. He's in the portal again. So schools have been aware of him. So I don't know this is what happened, but certainly there was competition. He was coveted. And look what happened last year with West Virginia football. Devin Carter was going to Penn State, ended up at West Virginia. These things happen sometimes too. So forecasting the future is difficult on a lot of these things, and you feel better when they actually have that press release and the graphics saying officially signed. Haven't seen that yet. There's been some gap between the commitment and today as we talk. It could come out anytime now because it's not easy to transfer. You got to make sure your academics are lined up. You got to make sure you have the check for this and the NIL for that. You would think any school right now would be pretty well versed in ironing those things out and making it quick, but the other player has to sign things, and I just guarantee you that someone has called him and said, "Hey, are you sure about this? Can we talk?" And you'd be dumb not to have that conversation too. But where it stands and why it is this way, yet another mystery, Chris.
Are you pre-writing a headline that says WVU's NIL check bounces, Javon Small goes elsewhere?
Big break, Javon Small out, something like that. Yeah, I might be
Yeah,
working
you
on
got
that.
to
I might be
get
workshopping some
your
things.
words together. You'll get
Mhm.
it. You'll get your wordsmithing going. Speaking of money, CMM0016 asked, and I think we've done this before, but he asked if you had a budget of 2 million, how would you spend it on 13 roster spots? We kind of did that one before, right?
Yeah, it's you can't do it evenly. Can't. So you're not doing 2 million divided by 13. Are you doing 2 million divided by five starters, or like eight, something like that? No. I think you got to prioritize probably two or three people. But then what's the big chunk for three people? Because I'm not sure that $250,000 is enough for a player right now with some of the things you hear. But that's $750,000, which is darn near half of your $2 million cap, and you still have 10 players to go. So could you reel in a 10-player class with $1.25 million? You'd like to think so. And you could, because freshmen, you're not going to give a lot of money to. And people who are just a guy, you're not going to give a lot of money to. But you're going to have tiers, and who is most important, who's less important, who's less than less important, and who's on the roster. That you're going to have to do that. And it's situational too. You might get into a bidding war where all of a sudden that big chunk that you break off equitably for your top three or four players, it might have to go higher for one player because you got to have them. So it's really difficult to say, but we did spell this out before where you can break it down into again tiers, I guess would be the way to say. Here's your top tier, here's your second tier, third tier, whatever. And you try to be as committed to that as you can. Otherwise, it gets very, very subjective and very difficult.
Salty Dog 8159 asks, there was a rumor a while back that Josiah Harris made a request for a certain, perhaps large NIL bag. Is there any substance to that?
First, I heard of that when I read this question.
Yeah.
Doesn't strike me as that kind of guy. But then again, he's no dummy. He's got his master's, right? So he knows how to play the game a little bit. Maybe he did some pre-law in his education and got into negotiations and decided, wait a second, I'm still around. You gotta get someone who knows West Virginia, who the fans like. Perhaps I'm worth more than what's in this bag right here. Perhaps I want this bag over there. Never heard that though. It would strike me as unusual from what little I know of him and from what I've gathered from stories about him. It would not strike me as unusual in the year of 2024 in the way college sports are these days. So
And there's different ways of viewing this because there's some guys out there be like, oh, give me this amount of money. And you're just like, where are you even coming up with this number? Like you're just throwing out a large number and expecting to cash a check. Again, Josiah Harris, no dummy, incredibly smart dude. More degrees than the two of us combined already, maybe, possibly. I don't know how many he's got at this point, but he will end up with more. I know that. But so he might have looked at the situation and said, we found it, figured out that he had what we like to call leverage
yeah,
and said, hey, your roster's in a bad spot. I wouldn't mind staying. Again, I'm just guessing here. And it's not what I'm trying to say is there's nothing malicious about it, I suppose. Like there's nothing bad about it to say, hey, man, I'm in a well leveraged spot here to try to make some money. And that's not a bad thing. So I hadn't heard that he had done that. But again, I also don't think it's as a malicious thing. And not saying Salty Dog was saying it was, but you know, there is that kind of negative connotation of you say, oh, he's asking for a big bag. Like, yeah, well, sometimes you shoot your shot when you can. So
But the trouble with this is that we do think he's smart, and not even think, do know he's a bright kid and certainly progressed academically. I would think he's probably also sharp enough to realize he averaged less than 4 points a game and shot 32% from three and 6'7" and had 3 rebounds a game. Um, that's a tough leverage to hold over a school, even in the situation that you described, Chris. And the other part of that is you're leveraging your situation, not against West Virginia, but you're leveraging with another offer. He did not end up in a power conference. He did not end up in a school that would make West Virginia regret the decision. He ended up in the MAC at Akron. Fine for him, kind of a homecoming a little bit. Maybe he gets an expanded role there, but I doubt very much that that school and that conference was offering him more money and that he went to West Virginia and said, "Can you match this?" And they were like, "Nah, that doesn't add up to me."
last very basketball specific question from Kayak Year One. It's actually a couple questions. We'll do the first part here. It seems like Baron DeVries has been keeping a lot of the recruit info close to the vest. When a new coaching staff comes in, what is the process of you two gaining the trust of people to get inside news? Like,
Well, can I push back on this a little bit? I don't know that he's like some secret agent CIA asset, like where he's keeping everything quiet. I just think he doesn't know anybody yet. And how could he? He's had one meeting with the media here and he's been really busy, kind of split between Iowa and West Virginia, his family and his job, trying to hire people. It just there's been no time to sit down and have a coffee with me and realize how great I am, right? I'm putting words in his mouth there. I don't know if he likes coffee, but he would find out how great I am, right? So it's just how could he just so and so the question then becomes what I want to focus on is how do you do this? So again, I don't think he's some never been in a fishbowl guy and doesn't know how to work with the media or isn't going to be good. I just don't I get a lot of people saying that that's not a him thing right now as much as it's a job thing and perhaps a me thing or you thing, Chris, or anybody that's in the media where we just haven't gotten to know him yet. Perhaps we haven't tried enough or often. Who knows? I legitimately haven't met him yet, to be honest with you. I didn't have a chance to because he was running around at that news conference, and then just there's been no time for anybody meeting me. You haven't seen him do a sit down with anybody at this moment. I don't even think he's been on the radio, the university radio. So I don't want people to think that he's some bad guy or he's not ready for this or he's like trying to keep secrets from us because I think some people can hold that against coaches because I'm one of the people who says you really need to let the fans know what's going on. I don't think he's not doing that, or at least intentionally. I just think he hasn't had the time and doesn't know the mechanisms, which is people right now. That'll change. How does it change? It takes time, man. Like you got to talk to the person. And then my experience with it is that it's gonna take like experiences, and it's the weird thing, but sometimes someone will tell you something and say, "Hey, don't say this, don't write this." And if that person sees it or hears it, they're gonna be ticked off at you and they're never gonna tell you something again, right? Like, "Hey, I told you not to do that." Oh, I thought we were off the record. Well, yeah, but I told you not to do anything with that, right? So it's just one of those things where someone may tell you something two or three times and then it never gets out and that person can trust you. The person may just like you and say, you know what, I feel like I can share some things with you. Um, that's not something you get in a book. That's just life stuff. How do you deal with people? How do you get along with people? How do you ask questions and take answers? And what do you do with the information you're given? And the other part about it is like you just hope reputation goes around because I promise you, when new coaches come in, they talk to people and say, "Hey, who's a jerk? Who can I trust? Who can I talk to? Who's a good guy? Who's this person I'm about to talk to?" And if you are good in your past, you'll be good in your future because the answer to that question of who's good could be you. If you're a jerk, when someone says, "Hey, so who is a jerk on the beat?" If it's you, they're going to tell you because nobody has anything that they owe you because you haven't done enough for them too. So sometimes your past is a part of your future. And sometimes, again, it's just human stuff. It's interactions. Like you get to know somebody over time. This isn't something you can kind of expedite because of the job. You're the coach, I'm the reporter. You have to tell me things. It doesn't work that way. And trying to press any button to make that go faster is not realistic.
there's a couple, like you said, time, I think, will kind of dictate what exactly the big reason is. I think there's a couple different things going on. Like you said, he's been busy, stepped on things like, hey, you got to find 12 new players basically to make this roster. Get on it. And you have no time, portal's closing, get on it. And then also, by the way, you have to start doing some fundraising and you have to go on the coaches caravan and you have to go out and visit recruits and you have to host recruits. So time is a thing. Also, the other part of it is it wasn't just a head coaching change. It wasn't even just a coaching staff change. It was essentially a 95% clear out of that entire department to get new people in there. So there's other parts with that. And then there's the basketball in general. Over the years, I've talked about this with recruiting. Football is way easier to cover than basketball for a host of reasons, but even just in general, speaking about the sports and the recruiting situation and the people involved in football, West Virginia offers or looks at what 500 kids per cycle, and then are serious about 100 of them. And so even if you only talk to 80% of them, you're talking to 80 kids or 400 out of the 500 kids over the course of a cycle. And so you get a lot of coverage there. You get a lot of guys there. Basketball, what they're looking for in a typical year, 4 kids. So they're maybe offering 15 to 20, serious about 10. So it's just less. Just the numbers are less. And now, if you'll notice, not taking a shot at Kayak here at all, because he's far from the only person that's asked about this, but go look at these releases or these, commitments and different things that are coming out and notice something different about basketball than there is football. So and so has committed to WVU per his agent. So and so has committed to WVU per his agent. This is a different world now. Like you're not trying to get information from the schools. You're not even trying to get information from the recruits. You have to start making connections with agents that are in some of these cases located in Europe. So you're gonna have to um, we might have to expense a couple trips
Mm.
across the pond here, Mike, because this is different. And this is something that people are going to have to get used to because this is how it's going to start coming out. This is how information is going to start coming out now, not from leaks inside the athletic department, not from talking directly to recruits, but agents.
Mm.
And lots of thoughts on that, but I don't think we have enough podcast time this week to get into that.
Yeah, you're only going to get one story from an agent too, and it's the one that's best for his client. So, or hey, is your client talking to my school? No, no, absolutely not. Well, he's on campus. No, oh well, yeah, he is, but he's not talking to them, right? Because he's not going to end up here. That's why. So, just things like that with agents, and this is how it's becoming very professional. But um, I think agents you have to be very careful with sometimes, which we probably should get used to. By the way, I'll be in Scotland soon, Chris. So if you need me to knock out some work, just Venmo me some per diem, and I'll make some calls, have some haggis, figure some things out.
We'll check it out. I'll see which of these agents is
Mhm.
located in and around Scotland.
Yeah.
Um, moving on from basketball, going over to baseball. Got a couple questions semi-related here. Dub V got M wants to know, given the injuries and losses from last year's team, is this Mazey's best coaching job? And Face Your Fears wants to know, where do you rank Mazey on that list of all-time coaches, all of WVU sports? So are we in that kind of perspective at this point, Mike?
Great coach, considering where it was and where he brought it. I would have a hard time saying he's in the top X of anything just because, God, there have been really good coaches across the university. And like historically, if you go back and I could tell you some things about old coaches from doing research for a book I wrote and other things that just kind of have my interest. Like there's a lot of good coaches that were at WVU across time. And even on campus right now, like you would say Nicky Izzo is probably one of the best coaches in school history. And I'm not sure that'd be the top of the tongue with everybody. In 5 years from now, you might say Dan Stratford is one of the best coaches in school history. Um, how many national championships does John Hammond have to win? He's on campus right now, too. So it's a loaded question. I think the cool thing is that you understood that women's soccer for a long time and rifle for a long time, and obviously football and basketball, those were going to be the coaches that would be in the discussion here. You would not, just because they were so successful and set up to succeed, you would not have expected baseball. The fact that he did that, and again, just not to belabor this, but they actually had a summit to decide, should we drop baseball? Should we invest in it? Like they brought in people from other parts of like the baseball world, pro baseball, former players, minor league baseball, to say, how do we get baseball right? Because it was that wrong at West Virginia. And here you are asking if like a team that I don't know, I don't think it's his best team, but is his best coaching job at the end? I mean, these are valid questions. I'm not going to argue with that. I think it's a pretty cool thing. It's very hard for me to answer that prisoner of the moment stuff. Like I would say no, he's not one of the best coaches in school history, but then I'd say that's absurd, Mike, because look at what he's done too. So to be in the conversation is an excellent achievement for him too. And I think a lot of people would argue with me and say, "Man, this guy's great. What are you talking about?" And I'd be like, "You know, you're probably right." Um, I'm not sure people come to my side of the fence and say, "You're right, Mike. He stinks. He's not good." I'm not saying he stinks. I just say like he's in that group now. He's in that fraternity of really good coaches historically at West Virginia, and that goes back generations. Like you go back to like Saul Metzger, or you go back to like Steve Herrick, who coached football, wrestling, and baseball at a very high level. Three sports. Can you imagine doing that now? Um, just a lot of good coaches, and it's a loaded answer to say he's great. He deserves everything he's gotten on this going away tour here, and he deserves postseason run, one shot at what he wants to do here. It's just so hard for him and for everybody else to say he's one of the best, but I would have no problem engaging that conversation with people. Where do you go with this?
Yeah, I think big picture, like all time great stuff. I need some time to sit back and kind of look at that. Some of this, he's been there 12 years and he's been an above 500 coach. He's done things for this baseball program they haven't done before. So in consideration, I'm not ready to go that far. But this, as far as this year, focusing on this season, and like I said, with all the injuries, you lose your best player. What was it? The first game? That was the first game, right? That he
First
gets hurt.
series for sure,
First
yeah.
series, and to still end up as a definitive postseason team, that's pretty darn impressive. And I think that's a really great job by him this year for sure. Because he fiddled and did a lot of different things. It wasn't like, hey, a couple guys just all of a sudden stepped up as far as the team goes. It was a lot of coaching strategy, moving guys around in the order, different pitching staff, different pitching rotations, all sorts of stuff. So I think this was a really, really impressive job by him on the coaching front.
Something for him historically, like 5 years from now, this program is reverted. Does that mean he's a better coach than he is right now? That's a weird thing. Like you look back and say, you know what? Had it pretty good. He must have been great because the program hasn't quite lived up to it. But conversely, if the program keeps going up, that might also mean he's a really good coach. He did a good job setting things up too. So on the field stuff matters too, but the infrastructure and the stuff that he's worked on, that could certainly continue on and help his legacy one or the other. And then if you look at his record, he's going to have the third most wins in program history. His winning percentage, I think, is two or three, and that's kind of weird because guys went like 14-4 in one season in the past. But if you look over a long period of time, I think his winning percentage is second. If you compare what he played against versus what some of the other schools managers played against, it's ridiculous. Like the Big 12 is just a better conference, just better. And he took some bumps early on, so you can't take away the first two seasons, but like when he was trying to get this thing rolling, then he got it rolling. And then when he's been, in that third gear for a couple of years now, the winning percentages, the conference wins, the postseason stuff, that's been impressive. So if you just kind of like wall off part of his coaching tenure here, that is time capsule stuff. That is where you would probably weight your conversation about where he ranks historically. That's good too. And they play more games, I get that, but he's coached about half the years that Dale Ramsburg coached here. Dale Ramsburg has the school record for victories. Mazey's way on his way to before the halfway mark is way on his way to surpassing that. So if he had coached, he's 12 years in. If he coaches 26, he'll have way more wins than Ramsburg had in 26 years too. So you can't say he's the all-time winningest coach, but he was on pace to be in a shorter amount of time against harder competition. And just a different era of college baseball too, where the players are just so much better now than they were before.
All right. Just a couple more questions here. This one's from Coal City here. He says he's read in the last few days about some wrestling program upgrades at other schools, including putting a new wrestling room on hold at Iowa State. I'm assuming, perhaps incorrectly, that athletic departments are putting some of these projects on hold while they figure out damage awards and salary cap type issues. Are there any projects that were planned but are being put on hold now at WVU?
I would say you were not assuming incorrectly there. I think that's very much the correct assumption. Just the folks I talked to at WVU and even around like college sports, they want to have that conversation. They don't know how to answer the question now because they don't know what it's going to look like. So I don't know of anything specifically that West Virginia has said, let's not cut that ribbon yet. Let's not break ground yet. I'm I'm pretty confident saying that those conversations are going on saying like, what do we do? Like, can we do this? Can we build this? Because we may have to shell out $20 million that we may have, may not have, may have to get kind of funky with to generate. Like that's going to be a tricky thing. So I think I would be very surprised if all of a sudden they said, hey, $16 million men's soccer facility going up in the corner over here. But where's that money coming from, right? And if it's coming from somewhere, shouldn't that go to someplace different. I just, and again, not to single out anything that I've heard, but I wonder how ambitious you can be right now where you're just so curious about what this immediate future looks like, Chris. Like 2 weeks ago, they were saying this is coming in 40 days. I haven't heard anything imminent about it, but 40 days is coming quicker. And you just wonder how many people are just kind of sheltering in their blanket right now, going, let this thing blow over. We'll figure it out when it hits.
Related money question. Tomcat F14. Can WVU afford to pay the 17 to 22 million for direct athlete compensation plus additional expenses? If WVU wanted to pay those expenses, but the Big 12 put a league cap at say 12 million, would WVU get wandering eyes for another conference? I want to kind of definitively say no to the second one there, but the first part, is that feasible amount of money for WVU to pay?
Don't know, Chris. And again, I think a lot of people want to, but don't know to say yes to this stuff yet. And it's just so fast. It's so fast. Like, and I don't want to keep harping on this, but just during the coaching search, we heard that like some schools were saying we're not paying buyouts because we need this $1.5 million, these $3 million to pay our athletes in the future. Like major programs are doing this. Like, what are you talking about? And all of a sudden, here it comes, 17, 20 million is $1.5 million, it's $3 million, that big of a chunk? Well, apparently it is. And just so how does this work? I don't know. I don't know enough about the bookkeeping of West Virginia apart from what I read online. You can go look at reports and all that stuff. They're all accessible. And do I see 17 and $20 million surpluses every year? I don't. Do I see conference payouts going up? I don't. Can I see a team or a school having a $20 million check again next year, Chris? This isn't like in a couple of years. This is coming like the start of the 25 football season. I can see that happening, but it's like a scholarship. It's got to be endowed. It's got to happen every year. And if you have a bad year, if you have, I don't know, if your payouts in your conference are going down instead of going up, and that's very possible. In a place like the Big 12, they'll have 16 teams now as opposed to 10. Like that stuff could all be really tricky for your number there too. So I don't know. Like part of me just says, yeah, sure, West Virginia will be here tomorrow. It'll be here 5 years from now. It'll be here 10 years from now. I don't know, just look at like all the financial stuff that has otherwise happened in the university. I'm like, wow, it's a different story than it was a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So who's to say that couldn't be the same in the future too? And that thing about where you said, Chris, you would answer hard no. I get that. I still think there's going to come a time for some schools. I'm not saying it's West Virginia where they say this is ridiculous. Like, what are we playing for? We can't win this game. Why are we committing all this money to this just for like a little bit extra, not a little bit, like a significant amount more money, but we can't win it. So let's get into a different league or the cap or a different classification where the cap is different. We don't have to commit as much to it. We can make more revenue, even though we're not getting the same payouts, but we can win more. We can market more. If we win more, our enrollment goes up. Like there's a whole lot that could go on in that conversation here. I just it's the great unknown right now, and it's wild and weird, and it's coming fast, and I don't know what it looks like. It's the fact it's just like hyperspeed and everything's blurry. It seems to me right now.
All right, final question from NC Mountaineer. Got a couple minutes left for this one. He says, any thoughts on Jamie Pollard's comments, the Iowa State athletic director? Pretty common sense stuff, but surprised a little at the candor. Mike, just for our listeners, maybe you, I don't know if you saw it. I hadn't seen it until I saw the question, but he said Thursday, it isn't the SEC and Big Ten. It's those that have all the gold that make all the rules. And then he continues on to say they are going to eat their own. And if we think that's not going to happen, you're a fool. I'm taking this to mean Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma are going to make all the rules, and those lower rung teams in the SEC and the Big Ten, say Vanderbilt, Rutgers, Northwestern, are going are susceptible, I guess, to
Iowa State.
something. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
It's not even the quiet part out loud, Chris. Now it's the whispered part, or it's the spoken in dark corners at cocktail parties part said on a megaphone right now. And by the way, those schools do play in the Big Ten and SEC, Chris. They do. I don't know how you can't blame him. You can, I mean, maybe he wants a job in one of those two leagues one year. I don't know, but like the cannibalizations happen. Like look what happened to the Pac-12, just because they wanted schools in the Big Ten. Look what happened to Texas and Oklahoma. Why? Because SEC wanted to have the biggest and best football. Kudos to them. They have the biggest conferences and the best football teams right now. Great. At what cost? And it's happening. It is just like use your eyes. This stuff is happening right now too. It's not one of those things you're going to look back and go, man, didn't see that coming. It's right in front of you right now. So all the financial and competitive and athletic and academic stuff, there are major implications there. Like it's worrisome. It's worrisome. And if you don't think that like athletics are tied to academics, like enrollment stuff, like anecdotally, like West Virginia's enrollment's down because they haven't won, not because of, but they haven't won a whole lot in football and basketball in recent years. If you go back to Clemson, when Jim Clements left here as the president, went to Clemson, enrollment was stagnant a little bit, started winning national titles, and all of a sudden enrollment went up and they were able to pick better students and have better academics. And just that's the way things work. And if all of a sudden you aren't doing great athletically, it's going to be harder and harder to get better students and sustain things academically. And if your academics aren't in a good spot because the finances of the world, that's problematic. It worries a lot of people. And like it's not a secret. Athletics are a huge part of universities and making those worlds go round. And a lot of the stuff right now is just really teetering. Like those plates have always been spinning. They're starting to slow down a little bit. When they start to slow down, they settle. And it's kind of like musical chairs, and that music stops. You want to make sure you have a spot. Where is it? What is it right now? And if you don't have it, but someone else does, I'm not sure someone else cares. Like again, go to musical chairs. No one says, "Oh, you can have my seat." No one says that, right? They want to go to the next round. They want to keep playing too. So I think what he said is very apt. It's a lot of what people have been thinking and maybe not saying out loud for a while, but more and more that's coming out. And if you put the same microphone in front of how many other ADs, Chris, would they either agree or say the same thing on their own? I think that it would be a pretty significant amount of people who would concur or repeat what he said.
I think they would. I don't know how many would say it out loud like that. Hope more, but yes, I think if you ask them in private, at least, almost all would agree on that one. So
The other part is like some AD and some president has to go, hey, the boogeyman's coming. We got this. And here's how. And I don't hear that anywhere, which worries me too, because this can't be unique thought by me. Like I have 2 degrees, Chris. I'm no Josiah Harris. I have 2 degrees, right? And I would think that, okay, somebody should be alleviating these fears and making these people who they need and want and ask for money from, make them feel better about things, right? It can't be a unique thought by me. Someone else has to have that in some ivory tower on some campus somewhere. Just go out to the people and say, we got this. Yeah, this is a scary time, but here's our plan. Here's where we need you, but here's our plan. Where's that? Where's the AD saying that? That bugs me a little bit.
Mike, I think that covers all of our questions from basketball and other categories. We'll get to football later this week. And also, if you haven't heard your questions and it was related to basketball or other, look for them in the 3-minute video. You get your own video later this week too.
Let's get to it. Until then, I'm Mike Casaza.
And I'm Chris Anderson.
We will talk to you then.